live. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Danielle Clark. You're tuning in to Onwards on the Win-Win Woman Network. This is a live show. Thank you for joining. We are here every Friday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Fridays. If you're catching the recording, that's okay. It's the same good information and the same good energy. Onwards is all about offering you healing conversations to get you unstuck. If you don't know me yet, it's a pleasure to get to know you. A little bit about myself. I'm a dog mama, cat mama, business professor, medium, psychic medium, and much, much more. Today's episode on Friday, the 13th, in this beautiful 2023 energy is reclaiming your body and soul after trauma. I have Dr. Matthew here. I have Lenore here, and she is undescribable. She is such a bright light. She is my dear friend. She is a fellow psychic medium, a doctor of social work, and so much more. I'm gonna let Dr. Lenore tell us a little bit more about her. Hey, Lenore. Hello. How are you? Lenore, let me get you off of mute here, my dear. I muted people so we could make sure that we had a nice quiet space, and it looks like I made it a little too quiet. Let's see here. Tell me if you are able to get off mute. Yay! Hello, how are you, my friend?
I'm well. How are you? Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for joining. It's a pleasure. It's an honor. It's truly a privilege to be here in this space.
Thank you. So we're really excited because we're here to celebrate you and really celebrate everyone who has come here, who's watching, who has some sort of a lived experience with trauma, and they've realized they need to reclaim their body, their soul. They're somewhere on the path. Maybe they're recognizing, maybe they're right in the middle, maybe they're on that triumphant path. Can you tell us a little bit about your, I'm going to call it your survive to thrive journey? Maybe tell us a little bit of where some of that trauma came from, and we'll then get to know a little bit about where you are now.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you again for the space, and thank you everyone for joining. This is such an intimate and really a vulnerable topic. So just commending anyone and everyone who's tuning in, because there's something in all of us that's attracted to this topic of why we're here. So my journey, my experience, my reality that sometimes doesn't feel like reality with trauma it's interesting because I wouldn't have called it trauma at the outset, and I didn't even know that it was trauma. But about 2.5 years ago, just over, my soulmate, my husband, the love of my life, Bruno, he unexpectedly took his life. And when I say unexpected, I use the phrase unexpected suicide quite a bit when I talk about it, because in the moment when it happened, there were absolutely no signs that he was suffering, that he was hurting in any way, that he was definitely not that he was suicidal, that he was close to passing at all. It came as a complete shock at a moment in life when life was actually going really well on paper, how it looked. And there's complex, incredible trauma that he had gone through in his life that came out after he passed. I knew none of it preceding his passing. In the aftermath of what he went through, I mean, we have our big T's, our big traumas. That certainly is my big T. And Bruno certainly had gone through big T's, big traumas. But up until then, my life, even though I felt sometimes were big T's, up until then, it was, looking back in retrospect, it was a lot of little T's. So small traumas, work stress, financial stress, economic stressors, family issues that weren't so debilitating, but in my relative space at the time seemed massive compared to then what I went through with losing my husband. It puts everything in perspective. After he passed, I mean, I'm a researcher by training and a doctor of social work. My specialization is in research and program evaluation. So I was clawing my way through anything I could get my hands on: research, blogs, websites, anything, any sort of information to understand what I was experiencing in my body. I'd never lost anyone close to me before. My grandparents passed in old age. We weren't massively close. We're actually closer now that I awoke with my mediumship. We have quite a beautiful relationship with them in spirit, but I'd never experienced anything like this before. And it hit me one day as I started to realize, and it started to come out really what my husband had experienced. I knew that it was trauma for him, but for me, it's almost like I didn't think that that word applied. It was almost like I didn't feel that what I had gone through was worthy of saying it was trauma, because something wasn't physically done to my body. It was an emotional trauma, but I wasn't physically abused like my husband had been. And it took really getting into the research and reading other people's story about loss and about suicide loss, which is, it just, your world is obliterated, because when a suicide happens, and also with any sort of, I think the similar kind of context could be said about overdose and other very painful losses that have deep, deep, deep roots, and many times that are unseen deep roots. Coming to terms with what had happened, it really took a lot of me accepting that I was worthy of using the phrase trauma. And so as I started to read other suicide loss survivors' commentary about what it does to the body, I realized that my body was absolutely in overdrive. I was absolutely in shock. I was absolutely, and still do have PTSD, but it was kind of understanding what trauma is, and then saying, okay, let me look at this through a lens of like how I physically and emotionally feel, and being able to say like, no, I get to claim a space where I sit in my pain, and this is exactly where I need to be right now.
So good. So hard and so good, because you're showing up here vulnerable and honest, and healing has happened. I just want to emphasize a point that you made, because I think it's really important that people realize, just because you didn't have an abuse or a trauma sexually, it doesn't mean that you're not going to experience some sexual trauma, even if something happened emotionally or spiritually, even if that piece was violated, like you mentioned, right? Physical trauma. This wasn't a physical trauma to you, right? So to speak, but yet it was. It showed up. You could argue that this was more of an emotional and a spiritual trauma, but yet it's impacting your body. And so for those watching, this is a good moment. Expand your research, expand your understanding and knowing of how trauma works, because there might be a lot more happening than you realize. That stomach ache that all of a sudden, right, popped up might be connected to a trauma that you haven't healed. So I love that. Can you bullet out a few of the body and soul symptoms of what a loss? How did they show up, even if you didn't realize that it was trauma talking? Some changes in your body and soul.
Oh, that's an excellent question. And it resonates because I feel so much in my body. As a medium, my mediumship is primarily physical and emotional. I feel emotions in my body. And I really started to tune into that when my mediumship opened up with my husband's passing. But it was tied to, it's interesting, like so much of the way that mediumship resonates in my body is also how trauma resonates in my body. And so I feel other people's now trauma with, it's been almost 3 years of healing. So the way that it physically manifests is different for me. But looking back, I see, and I still feel it. So I would oscillate, and this was really for about a year, and especially the first few weeks and months, I would oscillate between this almost like inner explosion of, I just needed to claw my way out of my body. I was so hyper stimulated, overstimulated. So this is the fight or flight mode, that it felt like I need to break out of my skin. I need to be free. Let me out. Oh my God, this is never going to end.
Yeah.
That would be one side. And that would be like the emotions of the anger and the fury of, how could you do this to me? How could you do this to yourself? How could you do this to us? How could you do this to the children that we never got to have? It was the seething, the confusion, the why, the I'm going to explode. That's one side. The other side was a complete stone cold, I am empty as a black hole nothingness. And that is dissociation. That's when, and now I understand the terminology, that's when we're understimulated. That's when our nervous system is so at rest that we literally feel outside of our bodies. And I felt, and my experience is that this first massive trauma, and there will never be a trauma like this that I experienced in my life, my threshold has been met. Anything else is like crumbs compared to this. Like I've imagined the most catastrophic thing that could happen. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I'll be able to make it through that, having gone through this. The extreme, and we all feel this to some degree when we go through something traumatic, it's our bodies shut, our thinking minds, our more sophisticated analytical functions shut down, and our body is left fighting in survival mode. And those, there's several different ways we can go to fight or flight, fawning, freeze, etc. But basically our nervous system is either hyper or understimulated, and there's sort of a spectrum then that we move through. To me, I'd never experienced something so extreme in my life. I'd had anxiety. I've even had panic attacks, again, work-related stress, but I've never experienced something so extreme. I thought I was losing my mind. On top of my mediumship opening up, and all of a sudden I'm able to communicate with spirits who crossed over, many of whom I've never met before, friends, loved ones, family members I'd never met. I totally thought that I was losing it. And so now I understand that there are these beautiful ways that spirit uses our body, but when our thinking mind is checked out and we are just like raw human form, we just kind of succumb to how our body moves. So these kind of vacillating between this, I call it stone cold nothingness, to hyper explosion, get me out of my body. It very much was that. So what did I feel? In the, I want to explode, I was hot, I would sweat, I would feel literally like I was spinning out, kind of like Tasmanian devil. I had a temper, which I usually never have. I was anxious. I couldn't think past, if you would ask me a question, my brain, it was almost like whistles would go off and I couldn't respond. I don't know, figure it out. Short temper, short fuse, don't ask, no idea. The stone cold nothingness is, you would ask me a question, I would just stare at you. I would see your mouth moving, maybe. Blank. What helped me and it was so incremental and so small. And I think this is one thing that I really want to emphasize for someone who is in that very early stage of very early trauma, is there's all this emphasis on healing and making it better. It's like survival. You cannot rush that. And that extreme oscillation for me lasted somewhere around like 11 months or so.
Yeah, that's good to know, because society, unspoken and sometimes spoken, right? You get the week of bereavement and you assume you're supposed to be all better after that 1 week of recovery, right? Or in some situations, there is no paid time off for your situation, right? As an example, society just says, well, right, you gotta keep moving, right? And so I'm glad that putting a time frame on, everyone also realizing everyone's on their own time frame, right? Yeah. Some people might move a little faster, maybe because they have had other lived experiences, maybe because something doesn't hit a certain way. And in some, there's going to be that forward, backward, perceived backward. It's never backward, but that perceived, right? Because you need to shake it off, right? You need to go forward, and your mind and your body needs to remember what it feels like, right? To be open, to be in the moment, right? And then there's that habit forming, right? So there's there's no right or wrong or way it should be. And hearing your story in those darkest hours, those darkest months, that darkest year is incredibly important, because I often hear it from my mediumship clients. Why am I still sad? Why am I still numb? Why am I still grieving? And it's been 2 months. It's been 3 months. It's been 7 months. Like, that's the answer in and of itself, right?
Yes. And I want to emphasize though, the 11 months was me just like completely, like it was
The extremes.
bare basics.
Yes.
For survival. This would come up when it was re-triggered many times. And up until a few months ago was my last like big bout of this. And it's been almost 3 years. You never stop grieving. I never stopped missing my husband, even being a medium and being able to access him or go to other mediums and trust that I'm receiving credible connection. It's a beautiful privilege to have good friends who are incredible mediums. And be able to tap in and know that you can tap in, and we all can tap in through our meditations, but we never stop grieving, and your body is forever impacted. And so what it is like now, and I've done so much mind, body, spirit healing. I can tell when I'm on the edge. It's almost like you feel it coming on. It's like, okay, I've got to back off. I'm canceling my calendar. I know that it's about, if one more stimulation, one more something that's too close to my loss, it's going to like, I'll tailspin. So I need to come back to myself, do the things I know that help me regulate my nervous system, and come back home to a space of like love in myself, and just honoring that this is a part of me and my body is different. I'm not the same. I don't work at the same speed. I'm not a workhorse anymore. Like you're different, and that's okay.
Yes.
You are.
I know the beautiful few years that we've shared our friendship, I've really witnessed that, right? Where something has felt good to you and you've leaned in, and then you're like, no, not anymore, right? And just honoring it, not having to make sense of what your body needs or what your mind needs or what your soul needs. It for an outsider looking into you, you've done a great job honoring the moment. Something might feel good for a month or two, and then it doesn't, right? And realizing you're changing and you need to go with those ebbs and flows. You can't just try to force yourself to do the same old. And I love that. I know on your healing journey, and more than that, right? Because I think that's the celebration part of today is you've really hit that reclaiming, right? It's like, this is my body, this is my soul. I feel connected. I feel like the me now is integrated. What are, you've been out there trying so many different modalities and meeting so many different people. Like, what are the things, maybe you could give 2 stages in the survival mode? What are a few things where you're like, okay, here's the modalities, here's some things you might want to consider. And then when you're getting into the healing, the growth, the reclaiming, what are some other modalities that people might want to try?
I love that. And looking back in the moment, it wasn't so clearly delineated, but looking back, it really was like the survival. And then it's like bouts of surviving, but also this expansion. So about, I want to say 6 months or so after my husband passed, I met another widow, and she gave me the best piece of advice. Everyone's quick to give you advice in grief. She gave me the one piece of advice that was like, oh, that came from your soul to my soul. And she said, do something every day to raise your vibration. And it's not do something every day to be happy, do something every day to be joyful. It's not gratitude. Like, to me, people are telling me, oh, be grateful. But like, what am I grateful for? My husband died in the most horrific way. I am forever scarred by this. Like, grateful will come when grateful comes. That can't be forced. And now I am grateful, but 3 years ago that was almost offensive to hear. Sure. But doing something every day to raise your vibration, how that resonated to me is one little something, a morsel, a little tiny thing that brings a little bit of light. For me, in the first few months, it sounds so silly to someone who's never been in this experience, but when you're in it, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. My little piece of raising my vibration every day was making my bed. If I could see a crisp bed every day, that sense of like, there's some structure, I've accomplished something.
Yes.
There's something that's clean, something that when I get into
Control it, right? You have
Yeah.
the power. Yes. Yes.
If I didn't shower that day, no problem. I made my bed. We're all
Yeah.
good. That, and also every day doing something to move your body. So the bullet points, a little tiny something that brings you a little glimmer of light. Also, I really got interested in, like, my sense of smell has always been really strong. It exploded with when I started working with spirit. I got really into just having smells around me that smelled good. So aromatherapy, oils, flowers, small things like I changed my bedding so it was bright colors. So I called it color therapy. I don't know if that's actually a thing. I think color therapy is actually quite different. Can ask our therapist in the room,
Well,
but
it's Dr. Lenore's color therapy. How's
my
that?
color therapy was bright pillows. That was my color therapy. And it was having little glimmers of a little bit of shine, something. And it wasn't to make me feel better, to be honest. It was like to keep me anchored and maybe keep me from slipping and feeling a lot worse than I did 5 minutes ago. And sometimes I didn't, that's fine. I'd look back to my bright yellows and there's bright yellow. I see it, I observe it, but I do know that over time it was cumulative. The other thing is gentle moving the body. When we are stagnant, and I noticed it myself, I would spend hours in the same chair to the point where my muscles on my legs are actually still indented from the arms of the same chair. I sat in this chair and stared at an oak tree for months. I don't remember what it was. I know sometimes I wrote, sometimes I journaled, sometimes I talked to Bruno. Oftentimes I would just cry. But when I was in that, I was processing, but every day I told myself, just move a little bit. So I went on a nature walk every day. A little bit of joy, that bullet point of raise your vibration, a little bit of find something that stimulates you just to make you feel something, hot shower, salt, aromatherapy, and then a movement. And to me, just connecting to nature, I mean, it moves things in our body, it gets our energy moving. It was meditative for me. But in that space, if you're experiencing this through grief, for me, I would feel my husband around me everywhere. I would see him in the clouds. I'm terrified of bees. And I noticed this pattern. I'd be ruminating and ruminating. All of a sudden a bee would like fly in front of my face. This happened every day for weeks. And I was like, okay, that broke up my rumination. It was like little message received, or a cardinal, or I'd see a cloud formation with a silly joke reference to it. And it's like just connecting to something that's bigger than us. I didn't realize it in the moment, but it was so grounding and so healing, and the fresh air moving through my body. Very basic stuff. I would also say, if it calls you trauma-informed grief counseling, I saw 2 counselors every week for a year. One was a suicide loss survivor. The other's trauma-informed therapist. That tapered off to seeing one for the second year, and taper. Now I really only talk to her when I need to. And seeing mediums, for me, trusted, credible mediums, when my soul called me to. And it was basically when I wanted some validation, I felt the energy needed to shift.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. I was into the thriving. I was sorry.
No,
I would have been long on the survival. So it was like, you got to survive. I'm still surviving some days. We all are. But into the second kind of wave of this, or when the I don't know, I can't even express how it feels, when the Tasmanian devil starts to subside a little bit and you're ready for next steps. That's when I went really deep into somatic healing and energy healing.
Yes.
So Kundalini activation, very intensive conscious breath work, Reiki training, more intensive yoga. I would do very gentle stretching in the beginning. Then I went into more intensive yoga. It was like breaking up the energy and really getting to the underneath, not just the grief, but all the other pain points underneath in my body that I'd carried for so long, that had come up and been triggered by grief.
Yes, good point. Sometimes they pop up at unexpected times, right? And that's really important for everyone to realize too. don't get discouraged, because you might be having a good month, right? Mentally, emotionally. And then all of a sudden your body decides to shut down, right? Or you've got this new cyst, or you've got this new sore, or you've got this. And it's our first inclination to say, what did I do wrong? I'm doing everything right. This isn't fair, right? And it's a part of the process. It's not a perfect timeline. Some of the physical, right, that needs to be released might actually pop up when you are doing well, because the body and the soul is not going to give you more than you can handle. So it's almost like re-looking at that and saying, okay, it's coming now, so I can release it, not getting frustrated, not doubting your healing journey. And I will say, I do want to add as well, someone who's known physical and sexual abuse myself, one thing, both in survival and that growing and thriving mode, I have found talking to my body and my soul and using the word we can do this today. We're going to feel a little bit better today. We're going to fill in the blank, made a world of difference on me feeling a truer connection and partnership with my mind, body, and soul, right? As opposed to, we're not alone, right? Our body is here to support us. Our soul is here to support us. Our mind is here. And just that shift helps. So yes, lots and lots for people to consider. Lenore, before we open it up for some soul-centered readings for our audience, I want to hear, like, 2023, like, reclaiming what are you doing now? I know we were chatting a little bit before the show. You've got some fun classes and some activities you're working on, but it's so important that people know you're still out there for you and for others in so many ways. So talk about 2023.
I am so excited for 2023, and to be able to say I'm excited about something, it really wasn't on my radar. I didn't know that I would be able to feel excited about anything anymore, to be honest. And there have been so many shifts. It's gotten so real in terms of, I came home to myself and got really real with myself towards the end of last year. And I had reached a point where things needed to change. I knew that while I was moving forward, it wasn't working. I was tired of myself in grief. I was tired of the agony. I was tired of every conversation that I had, starting with, hi, I'm Lenore. I'm a suicide loss survivor, and my husband took his life. And that is a part of me. It will always be a part of me. And it is a part of me that I cherish, I respect, I honor, I love, I hold. I never not think about it. But I also got to a point where it's like, do I need to say that out loud to myself every day for that to be my truth? And I was ready to say no. With that, because I am such a person who's rooted in service and rooted in giving all, and probably everyone who's tuning into this in some way, we are givers, we are lovers, we are healers. And I was really showing up from the beginning of, my job is to help other people through grief. And that was very much sitting in a grief space. I got real with myself when I realized it was burning myself and keeping me tied to parts of me that I was ready to release into the light. And so I got real about mediumship, and I sat down and I told Bruno, my husband, in spirit, and I told my spirit team, I told my higher self, I will continue doing mediumship. I will continue committing to growing, getting better, serving the best I can, but you've got to give this to me differently. I'm also such a social butterfly, and sitting alone in my apartment, I need to be out, and I live in Hawaii. Let me be free and be in the ocean. I don't swim well, but that's okay. I'll figure it out. And so it just started, when I set that intention, there were downloads. And I know that I serve better in groups. I know that I serve better in community. I know that I serve better in light. and like leading from a place of light and letting that then bring people with us into that space with our stories and histories and pain and grief that we've gone through, may that be. So going forward, I am doing beautiful group exercises, workshop activities, both in person here in Hawaii and also in Florida, coming up where my family lives, and other parts of the US. And so a lot of soul development with our community, intuitive development classes, workshops, bridging, working with our beautiful colleague, Kate Sekom, who is a licensed therapist, also a medium, working on bridging mental health and spirituality and psychic work. These two worlds work so beautifully together if we allow them to. Traditionally, they are kept so separate. They don't really care for each other very much. And we're saying, no, they're inherently linked. How could they not be? Our spirit is our mind is our soul. And so really looking forward towards workshops, or 2 workshops then that bring these together, doing larger group demonstrations of mediumship. And then my background is in evaluation and research. And so another part of the work that I'm doing is working with other healers, other mediums, Reiki healers, meditation workers, breathwork instructors on how to measure and capture the impact of their work. When we go through trauma and we go through grief, the first thing that we're told is go see a therapist or go find a support group. It is not on our radar to say, work spiritually or find yourself, someone to help you through your soul work. That's not even on our radar. And so I want to really contribute. I know this is part of my purpose, contributing to the research and evidence base, saying these modalities, mediumship, breath work, yoga, meditation, energy healing, Reiki, these are powerful tactics that work so beautifully in tandem with the traditional mental health respite that we already know that works, somatic work, EMDR, talk therapy, to some extent, support groups. So really bringing this credibility. So the practice of group work in spiritual development, group work in demonstrating mediumship and bringing the light to that, and then really showing in a scientific way, measuring this stuff works, it's real, it's not out there woo-woo, so let's take it seriously.
I could listen to you all day, that glow and that excitement. And like you mentioned at the beginning, you never even knew that you could feel excitement again. And here you are, excited, and you making the shift from doing what you want as opposed to what you think you should do is something I want to point out, right? We've all been there, especially those who have experienced trauma. Right? It's that survivor's guilt, even deeper than that. I now need to save the world. I can't let this happen to anyone else. So I'm going to be at every conference, and I'm going to be at every meeting, and I'm going to give this talk, and I'm going to write this, and I'm going to advocate for that. It's that should. And it's important that we realize those who are working with trauma, if there is a sense of I should be doing this, and you can see my scowl in that charge, it's very different than what Lenore just gave us. I want to do this. I am offering. I am excited. And so you also pointed when we're ready, right? Everything will come to us in perfect timing. You shouldn't be doing anything that isn't what your soul and body needs, right? So that word should, if that's coming up at all, right? We're going to remember ready, and we're going to remember that beautiful, bubbly personality that you are, Dr. Lenore, talking about all the amazing workshops and classes and research that you're doing. So we're going to close up at this point our show, and then we're going to offer some live readings for those of you in the audience who are here. Again, no worries. Same good information, same good energy. If you're watching the replay, I do invite everyone to like my YouTube channel, Dr. Danielle Clark. You can find me, and that way every Friday, if you can't make the live episode, we go ahead and we post it on the YouTube so you can hit the replay play. Lenore, thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you for sharing your story, and Bruno, and being such a beautiful, bright light to me and the world.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.